Hello friends, and welcome to the Great British Dig Meet the Archaeologists, episode 3, where we venture to Lenton in Nottingham. My name is Natasha and I'm the host of Behind the Trowel, and today I am joined with the archaeologists on and off screen and a special guest. We are in the midst of Hugh Dennis. Hello, Hugh. In the mist. I didn't know how to introduce you there. I froze. I was like, how to say this nicely? I couldn't think of an archaeology pun or anything. So how are you, Hugh?
Yeah, welcome. No, I'm very good. I'm very excited because, you know, I've not been on one of these before. I don't think I've ever done.
Have you ever been live? Oh, you have been live. That's a bit of a silly question. Have you been live?
Lots of times, yeah.
So I think what we will do is we'll just get everyone to introduce themselves in case you're not familiar with who we are. Let's go with Chloe first. Please give a quick introduction.
Hello, I'm Chloe Duckworth. I'm one of the archaeologists on the Great British Dig and I'm a lecturer at Newcastle University. I feel like University Challenge, doesn't it?
It does, you know, the more people, isn't it? I'm getting that vibe as well. Chris, please give a quick introduction.
My name's Chris Scott. I'm one of the off-screen archaeologists on the Great British Dig, involved in recording the trenches, doing a lot of the field work and doing a lot of the research for the programme.
And you're from Solstice Heritage.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then we'll go to James. Please give a quick introduction.
Yeah, I'm James Wright. I acted as a consultant and a contributor on the Lenton programme for the Great British Dig. I run a small one-man band called Triskelly Heritage, and I've just noticed that my study walls are painted the same colour as Hugh Dennis's house.
Great minds. Marcus, please.
Oh yeah, hi. I'm Marcus Abbott, and I work in digital heritage. I feature in the Dig HQ, where I digitize finds, do reconstructions of parts, tiles, buildings, anything that these guys find. We try and visualize for them.
Brilliant. And Gareth.
Hi there, I'm Gareth Davis. I'm head of archaeology at the York Archaeological Trust and Trenton Peak Archaeology, who were involved in this episode, is our Nottingham office. So I wasn't on camera or anything at all, but I worked with Chris and Solstice Heritage a bit to kind of sort of enable the scheme and stuff.
Laura?
Hi, I'm Laura Parker and I'm one of the commercial archaeologists with Trenton Peak Archaeology. I also do a lot of community archaeology as well, but I was one of the off-screen diggers. So I think I saw an arm and a bit of high vis of myself in the show.
And last but not least, Annie.
Hello, I'm Annie Bayard. I'm an archaeologist and small finds specialist. I specialise in metalwork. I work for Oxford Archaeology South, and I was the finds person on the show.
Brilliant. Thank you all for joining me today. I know it's kind of
myself or not.
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot. You're right, Hugh. I should say.
Needs no introduction.
Sorry, Hugh.
I'm Hugh Dennis. I present the programme, and I did almost all of the digging.
And you left us for the backfilling, right?
I left you with the backfilling, yeah.
Brilliant. By the way, for our viewers at home, this is an interactive Q&A. If you have any questions or comments, head over to YouTube and put it in the chat box, and we will be able to hopefully dive into your questions. Right, where to begin? I think the first thing we should probably mention, maybe Gareth or Chris, you can address this, is about the process of us actually excavating on this site. With permissions and everything involved. So either of you, please, could you give us a quick summary into that?
Yeah, I'm happy to say a few words. So Chris originally approached me about this site. So that this is a site that Trenton Peak Archaeology have worked on for a number of years. In particular, we did a big dig when the new Nottingham tram line was put in 2012, and that sort of generated a lot of interest in the site. but it's a protected monument. It's a scheduled monument, even though it is, I mean, as people would have seen on the programme a bit, you know, it's a little bit underpresented and underloved almost as a heritage asset, you know. But because it is a scheduled monument, Historic England have got a formal role on parts of the site, and if we want to do any excavation there, we need to get a scheduled monument consent to actually do any work there.
Brilliant. I'm glad you said that, because it's something, if I remember correctly, we don't really touch upon. We do say that there's permissions, but I just wanted to make it clear for anyone in the archaeology or any enthusiasts out there that we do follow protocol. Right, I think, what's the best way to do this? I think I'm just gonna go from the get-go. There was other archaeology on this site that we were not able to show. I see Laura smiling there as well. You would agree with me. We had beautiful Victorian archaeology, and I don't get that excited over Victorian stuff, and I got a bit excited on this. So unfortunately, we didn't really get to see that much of it. The show mainly focuses on the medieval aspect, and we get to venture to a part of Sherwood Forest. James, how was that experience for you?
It was really quite good, actually, because it was a bit of Sherwood Forest that I'd not been to for several years, that I'd written on in the past, and it was through conversations with Jane, the director, that had led us to that particular spot. It's owned and managed by some local trustees who are friends of mine, and we got to see them on the way down to where Hugh and I did that scene as well. So generally, it was just a really quite beautiful day out, really. It was wonderful. Got to see some old friends, got to go to a location I hadn't been to for a while with some interesting archaeology, and we filmed some TV while we were down there.
Brilliant. And Hugh, how was the experience for you, by the way?
What of the entire thing?
Actually, you know what? Yeah, let's go with that. How might as well ask the question. I already saw somebody ask. Let's ask that first. How was the whole experience for you, being a part of an archaeology dig? Is this your first time presenting archaeology of any sort?
First time presenting archaeology, but I've done lots of documentaries and things. But actually, for me, it was genuinely really enjoyable, because I was sort of learning as the audience were learning, and you know, and I was sort of amazed really by the care which is taken, and the sort of immense detail of, you know, logging everything, and you know, even tiny little bits of stuff which you can sort of extrapolate from, and clearly the sort of neatness of everything, and the sort of professionalism and the enthusiasm of everyone. Actually, it was a genuinely enjoyable and really, really interesting experience for me, and I hope there are lots more, because I thought it was great.
Fingers crossed. We've got one more
I disagree a bit that Hugh didn't know anything, because often when you were asking us questions, I noticed that you do have a vast knowledge of, I think, history and geography, and sometimes you would really throw us off balance with the stuff you asked, which, to be honest, I quite like. So
I think I have sort of a fairly superficial knowledge of an enormous number of things. I'm sort of like pub quiz knowledgeable. That's what I've got. But I did do I did geography at university. So in geography, where I studied it, I specialised in historical geography. So which is a kind of, it's almost social history actually, but it was about lots of the stuff that we were doing, those sort of periods that we were looking at. So I'm very used to, you know, sort of academically used to sort of research and interpretation and all that kind of stuff. But mostly I'm used to jokes. That's basically what my career has consisted of. So it was, you know, it was sort of going back for me. It was going back sort of 25 or 30 years, which was great.
Oh, sorry. Ignore that. The questions are starting to come in already. Please, as well, feel free, everyone, if you're getting your questions, put them in now so we can try and answer them all. Chloe, you mentioned about how Hugh would throw us a little bit with his I wouldn't say not random knowledge, because it is like you would actually be like, oh, actually, I can't give too much away just in case people have not seen the show. But I think it was great actually to have that dynamics, and of course not all of it was shown on camera, because then we'd have like a 4-hour episode. And honestly, when I look down and see how they were able to create these episodes into, you know, an hour, it's amazing. And I love, Hugh, what you said there about how we're able to look at just like small fragments and, you know, build a picture from it piece by piece.
Not only look at them, it's become incredibly excited about them. Sort of amazingly excited about things that most people sort of wouldn't be able to interpret or wouldn't realise the significance of. And that was part of the joy of it for me, is that kind of, you know, all that talk about where I think we're in the, this is clearly the Victorian layer now, and now we've got to go further down and further. And one of the things that I really like, although I knew it clearly, I mean, I think everybody knows it if they think about it, is the fact that sort of over the centuries, the place you're living on gets sort of higher and higher up, doesn't it? Because nobody clears anything away properly. It's a sort of, I don't know if there are societies where they're sort of madly getting rid of everything and returning everything to a base level and starting again. But clearly we're not one of them. And they, you know, these sort of successive layers of things are fascinating. And just the idea that I'm living about 3 meters above someone who lived, you know, would have lived, you know, 700 or 800 years ago is to me sort of fascinating, really.
Well, that's the thing. What I loved about the show is that it does show that you could literally, we're walking above history. And, you know, sometimes it's not even 3 meters down. You could be 30 centimeters down, you know, and that was the beauty of the archaeological investigations. Annie, how was the experience for you?
I really enjoyed it, apart from, you know, being able to get out of the house after 6 months of lockdown and see some archaeology. I really enjoyed it. The aspect I enjoyed, I think, the most was seeing the enthusiasm of the householders. You know, that, as you were saying here, you know, people have been just, you know, getting on with their daily lives, doing a bit of gardening, and, you know, and then you dig a hole in their garden and you find loads of Victorian stuff, or even the medieval stuff, and just that enthusiasm for people, for seeing people, you know, wow, you know, I live on top of this. That was one of my favorite bits, I think, and the finds, even though a lot were Victorian, yeah, still interesting. But for me, it was seeing the enthusiasm of the people, the public, was really great.
One of my favorite bits was in Benwell, when the guy, I can't remember whether this was in the show or not, but the guy who had a trampoline in his front garden, he'd sunk into his lawn without realising that if he'd kept on going, only about another, not very far, sort of like a foot and a bit, he would have hit a massive lump of Roman wall. And, you know, underneath his child bouncing up and down the trampoline, not knowing. I just thought it was fantastic. I thought all the people, all the householders, their sort of attitude to it and their sort of desire to find stuff out, and the way it brought the community together, actually, I think, for me, sort of rather than makes the programme, I think. I mean, clearly, archaeology, but that aspect of it is really important.
Yeah, I can agree. Sorry, Chloe, go on.
No, I think for me, that's what it's about. You know, there was, I suppose, everyone who's asked to be involved in TV, there's part of you that thinks, well, what am I getting myself into, and is it worth it? But because it's about community archaeology, it's not just about us, and it's not just about what we can reconstruct from the finds. It's really about how you engage people and how you show them what's basically there under their feet, as you said, Hugh, in a way that kind of maybe changes everyone's outlook. And I loved working with everyone in Nottingham. There were so many of those students in that house. I don't think that came across on screen. That every time you'd go there, there'd be another 5 or 6 faces in the windows, and you would think, well, hang on, I haven't met these ones yet. I think there were about 9 of them living together, but they were absolutely fab. They were just, you know, they were really up for it, to be honest.
It was the coming out in flip-flops and socks that The best. I think they thought they were allowed to get in the trench with the socks and flip flops. Like, no.
Well, they kind of wanted the trench left, didn't they? They were going to put a
swimming pool
tub in the.
Yeah, we're going to turn it into a swimming pool or something.
Right. And there was Terry and Simon, of course, as well, who the amount of banter between those two, I think, could have filled probably about 3 hours on its own, to be honest.
We actually do have Terry and Simon watching today, so hello. Unfortunately, they don't. I did ask if they could join the Zoom call, but unfortunately, they didn't have the facilities to do it. So hopefully, who knows, in the future, if we ever get to go near Nottingham again, we should drag them along to the dig.
I'd like, if they're able to type in it, I'd like to ask a question actually, because when we left, I felt like one of the nicest things that came out of that is that we introduced the students to Terry and Simon. They did just live across the way from each other, and I just wanted to know if, I mean, I know it's a bit difficult with lockdown and stuff, but I was wondering if you're still in touch with all of the students, and you know, if you ever did bake them any of your food, Terry.
That was a question that my father asked immediately after the programme ending. He said, I wonder if the students have stayed in touch with Terry and Simon, because my mum and dad watched it and they pretty much identified Terry and Simon as being the real stars of the show. The rest of us were just fluff in comparison to them. They really took to them, I suppose because they were possibly of a similar age, but they were really keen to know if the students had stayed in touch with them.
Well, I'll see if they get back to me on that one. So Terry and Simon, let us know. If not, we can have a call one day. You can tell me all about it. We have a couple of questions. Okay, we have a question from Adam from Theatre of War. Hey, Adam. It's really cool archaeology t-shirts, by the way. You should check it out. Has there been any talks of a second series, and would Hugh be up for presenting some more digging in the garden? Great British Dig.
I'd certainly be up for presenting more. I don't really know whether there's been.
I don't know.
You never really find out until the whole thing has gone out, and then they look at figures and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I would hope so. I think it's doing well. I think so. Yeah. Definitely,
and hopefully, you know, maybe again, once things starts to ease with restrictions, and once the world starts to look a bit better. Who knows, it might be easier as well for filming, because it's quite difficult to film archaeology and archaeological excavations, keeping that distance. And in general, working in archaeology, as we've mentioned in previous episodes, is quite difficult in general. So just finding sites appropriate is another challenge.
There must be lots and lots of, I mean, you're going to know far better than me, but there must be hundreds and hundreds of sites, aren't there? With
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, Chris probably can jump in a bit more on that, but I mean, of course, I mean, there's archaeology everywhere. It's just in regards to permissions, locations, and what people find interesting. Because what I find interesting, I'm 100% sure not everybody will find the same. I can get excited, as you've seen our enthusiasm over some random things to normal people. And then we get so excited if we see like a slightly different, you know, change in the color of the soil or the, you know, a bit more inclusions.
Some walls and bricks.
Yeah, we're like, wow,
yeah, it's a wall.
My wife describes it as spotting a tiny bit of brown stuff next to something slightly browner. And all of our careers wrapped up in one, isn't it?
Brilliant. And Marcus, there's a scene. Oh, sorry, someone's going to say something. Was it okay? There was a scene, Marcus, where there's a bit where you talk about the jug, and I love that they kept that in. They just smash. Yeah, they have a good time. They smash it. And here's a piece.
The drunk monks.
Yeah.
Monks. Yeah, that was yeah. I was yes. Yeah, that was quite good. But the lass I was showing it to, she was telling me that there's documentary evidence of monks swilling lots of alcohol and having a jolly good time. So yes.
Yeah, she's a medieval historian. So.
Yes.
Monks were required to drink. They only had beer, didn't they? Because they didn't drink water.
No,
The
that's
water
right.
was
It's safer, isn't it? It's
very
safer to
clear.
drink the mead and the beer than it is to drink water.
Yeah.
And today.
I've
That's why
looked
you're
into
on
that.
your
I've looked into that notion of not being able to drink the water. And water was, drunk very, very widely in the period. And if you think they've got wells, it's not just for washing. So they were drinking water. But having sort of delved quite deeply into this as part of some research that I'm doing on sort of common myths about the medieval period, it would seem that in every sense that we like drinking because you get a really good buzz off it, that was also a very, very large part of the reason why people were drinking beer, wine in the medieval period as well, because they enjoy the feeling of feeling scoobied ultimately. But there was a huge part of that sort of societal desire to feel that way. And yes, there is a notion that if the water has become contaminated, and they could tell if that was the case in its smell or its look. Of course, they didn't know about the microbiology, but water was drunk, and there's lots of monkish tracts about the good qualities of water, and we can imagine that there's a lot of sort of water cults and that kind of thing in the medieval period too, holy wells and the like. So water was prized, but people, as they do today, like feeling hammered.
I think the in relation to Lenton Priory, that sort of monks drinking, etc., is entirely appropriate because it was a very, very wealthy place, and one of the I don't think it was mentioned on the programme, but one of the really interesting things about Lenton Priory is that it had a very, very big market and fair as well, and the fair happened once a year. It was the Martinmas Fair, which is kind of early November time. So you might imagine that your annual fair, there was a lot of kind of feasting and drinking. That's a really interesting thing about the whole sort of setup at Lenton. Really, you've got this kind of theme of religious life, but also then kind of the market site and the trade and exchange going on with Nottingham as well.
I remember, so in the programme, as we mentioned before, there was another trench. And if I remember correctly, that trench was in regards more to trying to locate if there was a continuation or evidence of the market, if I remember correctly.
It was, yeah. We spectacularly failed, didn't we? That was my fault, though, really, Chris. So I don't know if you want to say a few.
Oh, but yeah, no, I'm happy to blame you, Gareth, for that one. I think, with that trench, Tash, it was really interesting. We were looking for to spread out really and tell a little bit more about the story that, or trying to focus on the story that Gareth's talking about and how interesting it was that you had this enormous fair that grew up by the Priory and became a market in its own right and became formalized into then streets and things like that. And actually, at the end of the day, we did actually find one of those streets, but a later version of it that was a Victorian street on the top of that street layout that started in the medieval period. And it was lovely. We had a great time in that trench, found a beautiful Victorian back street or back lane, but unfortunately not part of the medieval story. And so it was a little bit difficult to, unfortunately, to get that in the programme clearly and fit in everything that we did find, especially when you've got students digging holes and talking about hot tubs with Hugh and stuff like that to get in there.
It looked like, didn't it, that the Victorian sort of cellars and backplots just completely taken away all of the medieval deposits in that area. But Laura will confirm, literally just 50, 70 meters to the west, you're in the kind of the area of the outer precinct there, where the market or fair was, and we have done trenches, just to the sort of west, and it's fantastic, in terms of all of the the material culture and stuff that comes up. But
it's worth pointing that out, isn't it? I mean, Gareth and I know each other because we were both students in Nottingham some really not that long ago, was it, Gareth?
Getting longer.
But Nottingham's a great example of this, that if you have a street layout and you have a place where people live continually over a long period of time, the street layouts are going to persist. So Nottingham's full of different gates to the old city, and it's a lot of that. The medieval character of the city is actually still there if you know what to look for. Unfortunately, when was it? Would it have been the 60s or the 70s where they ploughed through everything to build Maid Marian Way, as they called it, ironically. But there's a lot of that city that is still really just based on the medieval layout, and it's wonderful once you know it.
Yeah, Maid Marian Way was driven through in the late 60s, early 70s.
Late 60s, yeah.
It took away an area that would have looked something like a cross between the York Shambles and the Brighton Lanes, really tightly packed interconnecting streets. Lots of earlier brick buildings in there, but also a huge amount of late medieval timber frame buildings in there as well. And that was all just swept away. It would have really put Nottingham on the tourist map for different reasons than it would on the tourist map. It probably would have made it a more authentically medieval tourist experience.
There's also earlier offences in the 17th century as well, isn't there? With what is a spectacular building, the Ducal Palace at the castle, now sort of overlies the medieval Motte and Bailey as well. So, as with Lenton Priory, it is a bit of I said at the start, a bit of an underappreciated heritage asset. There are just those sort of extra little steps you have to do with a lot of Nottingham's archaeology, but it, as Chloe said, it all is there, very much so in relation to Lenton Priory. A lot of those kind of boundaries in the churchyard and, the back plots of the walls, even the pub garden, I think where the first scene was, the back wall of that is actually the back wall of the main conventual church there, so it's fantastic when you sort of get your eye in, a bit like one of those magic eye sort of puzzles, yeah.
I'd say as well that this kind of really brings home how important it is that archaeology is built into the construction sector as it is now. And there are people out there who I think, well, isn't that a waste of money, making developers pay for archaeology, or deciding not to construct something because there's archaeology there. But when you think about, as I think Gareth said, what that area of Nottingham could have been, if in the late 60s, early 70s, they hadn't chosen to put Maid Marian Way through it. It just really shows why it's so important that we always have somebody investigating any new project, anything that you're going to dig or anything that you're going to construct, because the heritage of the city, once you destroy it's not going to come back, sadly. But it's just a plea really for the fact that I'd say the majority of archaeologists in this country are employed within a sector that basically excavates in advance of developer construction work, basically.
It's interesting, isn't it? I lived in the city of London for a long time, so sort of within the square mile by the Barbican. And one of the reasons that London has so many kind of modern, interestingly shaped modern buildings is because the ownership of the ground is still on the medieval pattern. So quite often for a modern tower block, there isn't enough room, is there, at the base? So you have to go like the gherkin is the shape of a gherkin. It does that because you can have more offices in the middle. You have to start small at the bottom and then kind of go out. But the fact that they have to work to the medieval floor plan makes for a much more interesting city, for example, than New York. So you're sort of constantly having to take the past into account, I think, when you're building. So clearly you should be looking at archaeology as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And also there was a couple of comments, and before we just get to that, following on from what Chloe said, I feel like by participating in a show like this, getting public engagement, it will help people understand that we need support in commercial archaeology, especially what's happening now in regards to planning permissions. So keep an eye out on our social medias for that, or any commercial archaeologists pages, because we're going to probably need some public help in the future regarding heritage assets. So watch this space. We actually had a comment from Nigel Sadler. I love the way you engage the enthusiasm of the locals. Perhaps some of your interpretation were a bit liberal, but it certainly seemed to please the garden owners. Now, again, from what I'll start it off and maybe we can jump in. Yeah, some people have commented that maybe we were not too complex. We didn't dive deep enough when we were explaining, but at the end of the day, we say a lot that's on camera, and we do not choose what's edited and how they edit. You have to be a fly on the wall in those situations. And also, this program is for everyone. So not everybody's going to understand certain terminology that we use, and we want to make sure that the information is there to spread to as many people as possible and to get that interest. And if anyone wants to jump in.
I'll just quickly say, Tash, I suppose on that, obviously, it's all of the programs and all of the work that we've done. I was say this having been involved in sort of the planning of the excavations and stuff like that, where we would put trenches, which sites we were able to investigate, and how. All of the work that we've done, and this is true of all archaeology everywhere, builds on a lot of work that's been done previously. So that's not only feeds into how we chose to try and investigate the site, but also it feeds into obviously the interpretations that were presented on the show. So obviously it's not just from that little bit of wall or that surface that we found that some of those interpretations are constructed. It's taken into account all of the previous work that's been done in doing that. So, but actually presenting that would be very, very difficult, and kind of giving such a long overview of in this site. I think hundreds of years of investigation would be quite complicated and difficult to achieve in the program, and not least in this instance, I'm pointing out the work that Trenton Peak have done. Gareth and Laura and their team particularly have done in investigating this site with the community already, and a lot of the work that we presented and a lot of the outcomes and interpretations that we showed were based on their work.
There's a couple of good examples of that, Chris. I think where the borehole was done, searching for the course of the old course of the River Lean. That was just sort of one point in the ground, but actually, we knew from further past investigations that we were sort of in that area. There'd been sort of excavations that had not found the river, so we're sort of homing in, and also we knew that the cloister was there at the south, which, that's only a recent discovery, in the last sort of 5 or 6 years. But, we knew that, so it was kind of sort of refining those targets. And similarly on the east end of the main church, there was specific questions to answer. We knew that we had some form of chapel at the back, but we didn't quite know what it was. Now, previous investigations, even sort of 3, 4, 5 years ago, we had suggested that maybe it was sort of these kind of almost like sort of petal-shaped lady chapels at the back. Now, I think probably through the absence of material, and also this sort of one buttress as well, that was actually a very significant result. So it didn't look like a lot. And one could say, or maybe you're being a bit sort of liberal with the interpretation, but it was actually some really important evidence of this sort of rectangular and apsidal ended lady chapel as well.
I'd like to say that I do have a problem with this particular episode, which is that I think there was slightly more oversimplification in this one than I'm comfortable with, and I have absolutely no qualms about saying this sort of thing publicly, because I'm in quite a strong position. I have a good job. I love presenting. I love working with TV people. What I don't love is being asked to, for example, link things in a way that I don't think is appropriate. And I you know, I'm quite happy to say publicly that I was asked to do that on the show and I refused. And I think what you don't get when you watch this is the sort of pressure that can be put onto people when they are, you know, when the TV crew think that there's something that they need. I think what has happened with that show, and what I'm quite happy about, is I think the production team, maybe after that episode, realised that they didn't need to come up with these kind of simplistic, flashy interpretations. And I'm hoping that, you know, that kind of pressure won't be put on so much in the future. But I'm quite happy to stand up above the parapet and say, actually, I think that one could have had a little more complexity in it, and that there were so many interesting stories and so many interesting people that we didn't need to try and make it quite so flashy.
And Marcus, you had something to say?
I was just talking about the evidence that we have. So, you know, when we find something like you mentioned, the buttress, it's a piece of evidence, but it has to be considered with everything else. And so it merely adds to the story, and it allows us to actually, you know, create this interpretation. It's not just from the buttress or just from the potsherd or the, you know, it's the whole thing, and it's just building a basis of the knowledge and then putting it all together. So that was really, sometimes I think if you go through the show, it does look a little bit like you just find one small piece of evidence and then extrapolate this amazing thing from that evidence, but that's not strictly true, because there's all the other evidence that's, you know, not mentioned, that's off camera, or all the research that's been done by you guys over the past decades. So yeah, that's really just the point. It's like, although it might seem like that on camera, it's not actually that simple. We can't just take this and go, hey, here's a giant priory based on this buttress.
But it is necessary to have such reconstructions, because some people may never have seen such a large structure before. We just sort of take it for granted that these places, you know, some people do have these sort of places in the centre of their towns that they might walk past on their way to work, or school children might visit once a year, something like that. But some people may never have seen such a structure, you know, different faiths, for example, or if you've never, you know, if you've recently moved into this country, something like that, you may never have seen such a thing. So having such reconstructions, I think, is vitally important, so you can actually access an audience that normally you wouldn't be able to engage with just that one piece of stone or that one piece of pot unless you create them reconstructions. Okay, they might be simplified, or it might seem like we are getting something from nothing. We're actually trying to present a story to people who may not normally engage with such stories or such places.
But I do agree with you there, Laura. I think that the thing is that unless we show people that that's really robust, it does look like we're just making it up. So that's why I think putting a little hint of that complexity, and we don't have to go into the detail, but, you know, showing the extraordinary nature of what Marcus does, which is, you know, to research around the topic in so widely, just a little nod to that, then people, when they see those reconstructions, they're going to be saying, do you know what, I actually understand why that makes sense now. So I absolutely agree. I hope I didn't give the impression that I personally have any problem with any of that side of things.
I spent quite a bit of time working with Marcus that particular week. Actually, one of the really nice things about doing this program, because I'm a one-man band anyway, and then you throw in a pandemic and social distancing, it was really nice to actually work with a massive team of archaeologists, which is something I haven't had the leisure to do really since I was working with Trenton Peak a couple of years ago at Nottingham Castle. Anyway, so Marcus and I are sat there in a really cold tent. It was really freezing for most of that week, perishing cold. And we're sat there. And because for the first few days, there wasn't a lot of archaeology coming in, because, you know, the trenches were still quite new and layers were still going down. So we didn't have a lot to react to. We had quite a lot of time to really, really work up that model. And, you know, we were drawing on things such as the work that Trenton Peak had done over the more recent years, since, was it 2012, 13 that you guys were that sort of time? Yeah. And then also looking at the evidence from beforehand. And I've actually, while Gareth was talking a minute ago, I just sort of turned around and noticed that I've still got all of the journals that I went and got from the local library, which contain all of the site reports from previous excavations throughout the 20th century and then further back, because some of the work that had been done on Lenton Priory had been done by a local architect and antiquarian in the very, very early years of the 19th century. And it was his house, actually, that you were dropping the boreholes into. So there had been a huge amount of knowledge built up over the, literally, as someone said earlier, the centuries, to give us that picture of what the Priory Church may have looked like. And once we kind of got the scale of it and some of the architectural details, again, from previous excavations, it was just a matter really for Marcus and I to then go and look at a model of a building that was still standing. And we picked on Southall Minster, which is only about 10 miles away from Nottingham. The building is of a similar scale, similar design, similar architectural features. And it just seemed like a really good opportunity to sort of almost transplant Southall and drop it into Lenton. And the two work together really, really, really well, because again, they were built at more or less the same time. Southall just slightly after Lenton, but the two buildings would have been going up at the same time. They would have been scaffolded at exactly the same time in the earlier 12th century. So yeah, there was a huge amount of background data that had gone into that really. And I agree, Chloe, it would have been lovely to have seen slightly more of that. But then again, there was a lot of stories to be told, I suppose, in the episode. So, you know, I guess what we would like to see as archaeologists is different to what editors want to see, and probably both the editor's story and the archaeologist's story is totally different to what the general public wants to see. I suppose really every person's got their own requirement, hasn't they? It's I don't have the answers to this, but I just wanted to sort of acknowledge that Marcus and I work like dogs for 5 years. And Marcus did an absolutely brilliant job, so thank you for that.
I did make a few bits wrong. Remember we went down to the trench. I built the lady chapel, quite happy. I was like the last day or the day before, you know, the day before. I went down to the trench with you and we looked at the buttress and I was like, no, that's not fitting the wall. This is not correct. So I have to go back and rebuild it.
I do think if we, you know, do get the opportunity for a second series, I would really love to be a part of you guys as well, maybe to create an online database or some sort of resource where people who have watched the show can then access all the materials, all the PDFs of previous archaeological investigations. There can be like, you know, theory stuff. You know, for example, Marcus will be explaining why he's created that, kind of like the backstage, what we're doing kind of right now. But everybody explaining why they've created this or where they've come up with this assumption. It's not, you know, it's not an assumption, it's an archaeological interpretation or it's a scientific fact. So I think, and I hope that if there is a second series that we can have this online resource to accompany the episodes that go live. I think that would be really great. So trying to
can we include a blooper reel?
Yes, yes.
No,
No,
absolutely not.
I thought on the again in that one in Benwell when the guy who had the AstroTurf garden who rolled back the AstroTurf so we could dig a hole in it. I thought it's almost irresistible at the end just to roll the AstroTurf back and leave the hole. Just to see what might happen. The show, I mean, it's a really delicate mix, I think, of having to tell stories, and as you say, as Mark said, there are lots and lots of stories to be told, and there's lots of evidence that you can't bring in, and there's evidence that you do bring in, and you know, week on week, I guess that's going to, you know, that balance will change something. There are always going to be bits that you can't show because it's you know, it's a finite length, isn't it? But I think I mean, in Lenton, I think the story itself is fantastic. I think the whole thing about, you know, mate of William the Conqueror builds a massive priory. It lasts several hundred years and then suffers in the dissolution. Then there's this sort of this amazing change whereby just almost overnight the whole thing, this massive priory with hundreds of slightly drunk monks in it, kind of disappears. The whole of the point of that area of Nottingham goes, you know, and now it's being rediscovered, and the people in the area are realizing what was there. And for me, that's a fantastic story to tell.
Yeah, I really like that when you went up to the castle, as it were, Hugh, and you were sort of looking out over towards where, you know, Lenton and where the priory would have been, and just how you were sort of explaining how massive this structure was. And now, you know, you just look on sort of terraces of houses, and just how much only in a few hundred years that the city has changed so much. And I really like that bit. I thought, yeah, hopefully that's also sort of going to make people look at their city slightly differently as well, and see how the landscape has just completely changed, but it's still there under their feet.
One of the things that interested me about the series as a whole, actually, is the fact that, you know, if people look back at this particular period now, the evidence, you know, there is so much to go on, isn't there? In the past, you've had almost nothing. So you're kind of relying on tiny fragments of things and all the rest of it. And in the future, you will have, you'll know how people walked and how people spoke and how people moved and how people dressed and where they lived. And you'll have all the, unless there is some sort of immense sort of disaster, which means that all, you know, and, you know, dystopian movies are all correct, there will be a sort of a body of evidence, the like of which we've never, or you guys have never had, I guess. So I suppose my question to you is, what happens to archaeology in the future, given that that is the case?
Well, I thought
silence.
This is what Hugh does to us when we're filming sometimes.
No, I have thought about this. I think that actually the problem in the future is going to be the volume of evidence and the structure of the evidence, because now that we dispose of our waste in like en masse, it's actually quite difficult. But there's a really interesting program about Atari. You remember the games company Atari? Yeah. And they have this game that was a game that came out to celebrate like the release of E.T., I think it was. And the game absolutely flopped. And there was this urban legend that Atari, because Atari kind of ended up flopping as well, that they'd buried all these cartridges in a landfill site because E.T. had destroyed the company. And they actually answered that question with archaeologists. So they went and excavated the landfill site, and they found a whole bunch of cartridges. It wasn't just the E.T. game. And they looked into it and they interviewed people, and it was a whole different story, you know, the way the company had fallen apart. But there was something in that, because I thought, well, you can actually still, as long as you have a research question, you can still ask something really interesting of archaeology, even when it's chucked into a landfill site. But in terms of the stuff that survives, I think if you look at the amount of data that's online digitally and where that's all stored in servers, actually the stuff that survives is going to be the stuff that's replicated, which is the same as ancient texts. So, you know, the most popular texts are going to be written multiple times, and some of them will survive. It's the same with digital data. We won't have everything, but it's interesting to think about what we will have.
I think it's called garbology. It's actually like an official term going through our rubbish. It's called garbology, and it's almost like stratigraphy through time, but it's just in such a small amount of time, because obviously you still see all the layers of the rubbish that you've. But yeah, garbology. Oh, there's always space archaeology. If you want, you can go into space, discover archaeology on other planets.
Sounds a little bit beyond the budget of more 4 to me.
Always next season.
I'm curious too, because there's a scene where you actually get to see the geoarchaeologists interpret the borehole. How was that experience for you? Did you even know that we did that sort of stuff?
It sort of, I've done sort of sediment analysis as a geographer. So I'm sort of, I was constantly thinking how that, because the question when I was looking at it was, this will prove where the course of the river, and I thought I'm not quite sure. I'm not sure. So I was thinking about sediments and meanders in a river and oxbow lakes and all that kind of stuff at that moment, which was what I spent a long time doing, with sort of flumes and all that kind of stuff at university. But
did you really? How on earth did you not manage to stay in that and go into the dull field of TV and comedy?
When I left university, I sort of did physical geography because you had to in the first year, having thought that actually that was the thing I wanted to do, and I decided actually quite quickly that I didn't really. Then I became this sort of historical economic sort of geographer. And then when I left, I was offered a place to go back and do a PhD, but only because someone had missed the grade they needed to get the grant for a PhD. So the professor in the department was kind of phoning round going, look, I need this PhD doing, would you come and do it? And it was on taxation and local industry. And it took me about possibly 15 seconds to say, do you know what? Dr. Dennis does sound very impressive and everything. I think I may want to go in another direction. So, but all those things. I love the borehole bit though. It was just sort of fascinating. Just seeing all the sort of stratigraphy of it is great, isn't it?
And then there's a scene actually, James, you get to look in and you talk to us, because I never got to see this. I never got to see it. So for me, it was amazing when there were parts of bricks that you were able to decipher and spot date.
Yeah, we did look at some brickwork. I don't think it made it into the show. In fact, I'm not even certain that the bricks were filmed. I know that you and I, Tash, had a conversation about some of the bricks, and we filmed a little bit. And then Jim from Solstice Heritage and I had a chat about bricks as well. But I'm a bit of a brick nerd. It's no great secret. I'm happy to admit that. You know, I'm a member of the Brick of the Day Facebook group, proud member of that, as are many other members present, I believe, in this chat. So yeah, it was quite good for me when stuff like that started turning up, and it was great to sort of work with Annie along those as well, because they were turning up as I suppose disarticulated bits of buildings. They were in the backfill and of various features, and they were coming up, and Annie was looking at them, and you know, I had the ability to give a perspective on some of the building materials. Yeah, and there was some brickwork, and it was quite nice to be able to kind of tie that in, because it was quite early brickwork. It was that very, very slender handmade brickwork, and you know, there are references right at the very, very end of the life of the priory, around sort of 1500 into the 1520s, of brick construction, which is really early for Nottinghamshire. There's only about 2 or 3 other high status brick buildings which were going up that we know of in the county at that period in time. And so to get a tiny little bit of evidence of that was great for a building materials nerd like me, particularly somebody who spent the last 4 years studying bricks. So, you know, that was actually really quite exciting. But, you know, like many things, you know, it wasn't possibly exciting enough for the general public because it was a brick.
You really don't want to worry about stuff like that. I am a member of a thing called the Cloud Appreciation Society, for which I was ridiculed on Taskmaster. But they're fantastic. You get a picture of a cloud every week. It's great. It's amazing. Very calming.
Didn't you try and offer that up as one of the prizes in the first section of Taskmaster, as I recall?
I think I did. It was yeah. Got Greg Davies ripped me apart, probably quite rightly. But I do like a cloud. I mean, I'm not ashamed to admit it. I love a cloud.
Well, if ever I end up on Taskmaster, my wife and I are quite big fans of the show. I probably wouldn't bring my brick in as a prize, because I think I'd get it ripped out of me as well.
But you'd have a brick and you'd be able to do something with it.
Well, they're just behind me, actually. I've got my little brick collection there on my proud brick shelf.
Hugh, you should actually join the Brick of the Day, then you can also say that you're a proud member of it.
Are they markedly different, the different bricks in Brick of the Day? I mean, what's a Tuesday's brick different? How does it differ from Wednesday's brick?
Sounds like a song, doesn't it? Well, Brick of the Day, I suppose, is more community-led. It's lots of people writing in about brick buildings that they have observed, or look at this amazing bit of pointing, or look at the nice nogging of this timber frame building. It's all led by people posting in.
What is nogging? What is that?
Nogging is the infill, brick infill within timber frame buildings.
Oh, okay.
You pop bricks into the
proper medieval thing.
More post-medieval with brickwork, but William Shakespeare's house had brick nogging, a new place in the 1480s, I believe. So yeah, it's very
that sort of, it's that kind of the thing that looked like a Morris Minor estate, those buildings. Do you remember?
Yes, exactly that.
And Annie, what was your favourite find that was brought to you in Dig HQ?
We found loads, and unfortunately we didn't see much of it actually sort of on the final edit, but the tables were absolutely jam-packed with lots of brick, tile, lots of animal bone, and we had some medieval potteries. Obviously that was on the show, but one of the funniest ones that actually sticks out in my mind is something that I didn't have a clue what it was, and I'm a metalwork specialist, and I'm looking at this thing, holding it up one way and the other, going, what on earth is this thing? And I had absolutely no idea. I knew it was incredibly modern. It turned out it was a bike brake from a mountain bike. And that just sticks in my mind. I know I should say an amazing piece of green glazed pottery, but for me, it's this mountain bike brake. But it was jumbled in with sort of Victorian stuff and little bits of medieval. It just sort of shows really how much, the ground has been turned around. It's supposed to be quite high then, I guess. So a bike brake was just fantastic, and there were loads of kids around as well, coming out of school, and they were all trying to guess what it was. And they was like, "Is it a door knocker?" And in fact, it was one of the crew that said, "Isn't that a bike brake?"
Yeah, it was Nick.
Was it? Yeah. It was just brilliant. So, yeah, I should say medieval pottery, but it was the bike brake.
I think I do have a photo actually of you guys discussing it.
Yeah. Yeah. All these other things, and just the bike brake. But no, we did find a lot of stuff, a lot of animal bone as well, which is from the Victorian levels, which we didn't see on the show. But some of it had like cut marks in it, butchery marks, so that was interesting. And looking at the types of bone, so there's quite a lot of pig, there was sort of sheep and goat as well. So just seeing, that idea of what people were eating, 150 years ago. Yeah, that was kind of cool. The cut marks, that was cool too.
And Hugh, I know we're pushed for time with you this evening. What was your favourite find? And this is on any episode. What would be for you the most significant?
Well, my favourite episode of all of them, I think, was the Massam one, just because we sort of knew, didn't we, pretty much what we were looking for, and it was medieval graveyards, wasn't it? So Anglo-Scandinavian remains, really. And I have to put this in context. My dad was a vicar who became a bishop, actually, of that area. Up in Massam. So I grew up next door to graveyards. I mean, I know that sounds very macabre, but there was always one just over the garden fence. There was a graveyard. So, and it never really bothered me. I never particularly thought about what was in a graveyard. Ridiculous as that seems, they were just very sort of calm places with stones, commemorating people, etc. But when we got to Massam, actually digging down, the trench that you were doing, Tash, actually, where we discovered the two, when I say we, clearly I didn't discover it, where you discovered the two bodies that were sort of lying, sort of slightly intercut, weren't they? Between this, effectively between a sort of somebody's extension and a sort of a soil pipe and a cash point, which was in the marketplace, and I found that sort of moving in a way that I really wasn't expecting to to find. I wasn't expecting to find it moving, and my thing there actually was how odd it is. This is about telly more than archaeology, actually. It just didn't seem quite right that you would sort of discover these bodies which had been undisturbed and had clearly been buried in a very sort of, you know, sort of, there were rituals involved and all the rest of it. So they were sort of properly buried with great care to uncover them, then point a camera at them and then go bye-bye. You know, so for me, in that there is this sort of slightly unfinished business of what actually happens now to those people, you know, the people that they were. And I think they're being, there's a possibility they might be reburied in the churchyard in Massam. And I sort of intend to go back, and I think Richard's going to go as well, to sort of see that happen and be part of that, because it just felt, you know, it's odd actually. I mean, you must be very used to uncovering bones and things, but weirdly we don't do a lot of that on Mock the Week. So you know, I found that a really, really interesting and very sort of moving thing.
You made some interesting points there. I think, Chris, would it be possible for you just to address a couple of that?
Yeah, so that's right. Those people will be reburied in Massam. That's one way of dealing with the human remains that we find, and that in this case that was always the intention. There's a few in terms of excavating human remains. Obviously, there's a lot of care and a lot of planning and in fact permissions that go along with that. It's one of the few areas of archaeology that's governed by law, so we had to get permission to excavate those human remains. Part of it, though, I think, and what's really, really important, and there's a lot of ethical discussion about it and the archaeological means of doing it, but effectively, if we're going to disturb those people, first of all, we should get the most information that we can to share with others about that. And human remains are an incredible resource in terms of, and an incredible opportunity to get a lot of information about the past. So they are currently being looked at by specialists. We are gaining that information. That information will be presented. One of the ways it will be presented is in the report, the archaeological report that comes after, that we're producing for that excavation that we did. And then obviously at the end they'll be reburied. But in terms of the TV aspect, I suppose what I'd say about that is I would see the TV element of that really as part of that presenting of information and about the past that comes as a benefit or an outcome really of disturbing those people, is that we're able to inspire hopefully a lot more people to understand something else about the past, about their shared past. And also obviously it was said on the episode to realize that people in the past were people just like you and me, and there's no better means really of giving people that perspective than showing them human remains from the past. And
yeah, I think that's right. I wasn't really me. I mean, clearly, you know, you don't have a program unless you do point a camera around them. So I wasn't
sure.
You know, I'm not doubting the you know, whether that should have happened or not. It was a more sort of a personal thing of, you know, rather unexpected way. I felt like I'd met two people who I kind of needed to say, you know, goodbye to properly, as opposed to just sort of walk off again. It was really a sort of it's a very personal thing, actually.
Yeah. I think, and it's lovely really that I think that comes across in the program. I think it's really important, and I think it's part of that message, and it's part of portraying that message that hopefully we can give people the idea that people in the past weren't different, stupid, useless, or unable to be related to, and you showed that.
But I do think it's, and I really do have to go in a minute, because I've got my partner's having her vaccination. I said I'd take it, which is quite an important thing, isn't it? But one of the really, good things I hope about the show actually is this idea that, when I did Who Do You Think You Are, what happened on Who Do You Think You Are is they'll research all this stuff, and you actually realise that, whatever you do and whatever you've done and all the rest of it, you are actually just a sort of an amalgam of all sorts of different people, and the fact that you've ended up doing what you do at that moment in time really isn't down to you, is it? There are so many sort of points at which it could all have been very, very different, and you sort of have to look backwards in order to understand what you are and who you are and where you've come from. And I think that's true. That's what I really liked about archaeology, about the series. Actually, it's just understanding, the current condition in the context of the past, and not in terms of kings and queens and wars and the Battle of Agincourt and all that kind of stuff, but on a much more sort of local. This happened here.
Yes.
I am part of a continuing community of people who have occupied these streets and this site, for thousands of years, and we are just sort of a step on the way before space archaeology takes over.
Thank you so much, Hugh. I know you do have to go. But I will send those photos. I know I've been telling you for like...
You have, yeah.
I still haven't sent them. I took so many photos.
Some of them. Yeah.
I will send some photos to you from the dig. And by the way, we have one of the students from the dig is here. They're saying hello. It's Morgan. So hello, Morgan. Thanks for letting us dig in your garden. And Hugh, again, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. You were fantastically good to work with, and I genuinely enjoyed it, and I hope everybody out there enjoyed watching it. So here's the next time. Let's hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hugh.
Bye.
Bye. See
you.
Yeah. Cheers. Bye.
Bye. Hugh Dennis is out. Brilliant. Where were we? So yeah, that's great. Thanks to the students for tuning in. How does it feel to be on the show? Did you make the cut? Because obviously there was, I think there was 7 students in the house. I can't remember.
I said 9, didn't I? It might have said 13. Was it 19? No. So many
30
students.
of them. No, it was great fun to meet the community. I think that's what I loved so much about this project is, as Annie, as you were saying, there were so many finds. There was so much going on that did not make the show.
Yeah.
Where Laura was as well. You interacted a lot with the students. How was the experience for both of you in that sense? Because it's quite unusual for us. It's quite unusual dynamics to be immersed in this sort of situation. Either or.
Who's gonna
Who wants to go first?
You go first. Thanks. Yeah. No, it was like I was saying, the community aspect is something that I'm really keen on. I've worked with the public in archaeology for sort of over a decade, but it was in some ways it was kind of like a student dig, like when you're at university and everyone's digging holes, and then you've got the finds tent where everyone's looking at the finds and cleaning the finds, and everyone's trying to work out what's going on, and constructing a narrative, and meeting new people, it was a really friendly team to work with, just the crew and the archaeologists as well, but also the public as well, some who I think we didn't really make it on the TV. but yeah, that was my favorite aspect. It is a bit strange, you know, having cameras pointing in your faces and having to repeat things several times and you forget what you say, and then saying something that you shouldn't think, go, oh no, please cut that bit, because that's the end of my career if you show that. James is laughing. Yeah. So, but it's, you know, for me, it's telling the story, isn't it? And I know obviously I don't have any input into post-production, but I think the stories were told really well, and it really brought out the kind of community aspect of the archaeology. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. Love to do it again. Yeah,
I think for me, it's the opportunity to be able to find an object of any age and literally hand it over to the person who maybe owns the garden or lives nearby or is just passing through, and say, you are now the second person after me to have held that object since it went into the ground. And sometimes we're talking thousands of years old, and it's a concept of the concept of time for kids is quite a hard one for them to grasp. And I think that's one of my favorite things to do, is try and explain to, you know, young children just what 100 years ago is, or 1,000 years ago is, and we try and explain it in terms of their age, and the fact that they don't even know maybe how old their grandparents are, and they think that maybe it was around when their grandparents were kids, and we're saying, oh no, it's a bit older than that. And I think that's the nicest thing. But yes, with the students, they did make a very good cup of tea. So thank you. It was when we were digging that big hole and then backfilling it again, the cup of tea kept arriving, so that was good. And that's the best bit about the community archaeology side of this is the tea and the cake that does come your way eventually.
Yeah, homemade cakes are the best. Oh, I missed that. By the way, Morgan has just commented saying, no problem, lovely to have you all. Our landlord thanks you for putting it back together. Oh, and we have a comment here for Chloe from Craig Rycroft. Thank you for your comment, Craig. Classic medieval.
Oh, put it down.
That's going to be on your epitaph now, Chloe.
It's one of those things that, because I do medieval archaeology as well, and I get really excited when it's medieval. It's just one of those things that comes out of your mouth, isn't it? Oh, that's classic medieval, and then you don't think about it until you see yourself being played back on the telly box. And I just like to thank whoever turned it into a GIF so that people can bombard me with it whenever they want to. Yeah.
I really enjoyed the community on that one, and I love the fact that I think was it Sarah. I think her name is Sarah, the one who was so she was studied French medieval history, right?
Literature.
But literature.
Yeah.
It was just so fantastic to honing in all these different aspects, and then to continue our understanding of an area. And I love the fact that we met her there. She was literally living there, and she got so excited when we were there. We got to, you know, have a good chat all the time, and especially you. And you know, that's what they get to see as well on camera. So I think that was great to get those connections. I really enjoyed it, and I loved this episode because of how many career paths that are shown. You know, there's so many different things you can do in archaeology, and I really actually loved how we could see it. Even geoarchaeology, something not many people will know about, and we got to see, oh yeah, you can do this, and you can interpret the deposits in this way, and I really enjoyed that. For our viewers, if there's any questions you have for us, now is the time.
I'll just say on Sarah as well, because we didn't talk about Sarah before, but working with her is such a great example of how community archaeology shouldn't be just kind of top down. So it's not just us going in and saying, this is what's here, look, and like kind of telling people that actually she came in with her own set of knowledge and her own interesting things that she knew about from this medieval French literature. And it's all the different skills that all the community members bring to it that I think makes it so brilliant, actually.
Well, everybody's got their own experiences of life, haven't they? For example, I was digging at Nottingham Castle a few years ago, and we were uncovering a load of features and shapes in the ground that I didn't quite understand, and a few of the volunteers that we had on the site said, well, it looks a bit like an allotment, you know, these are the kind of holes you would dig and trenches you would dig for certain types of vegetables. And because I don't have an allotment and I don't necessarily, you know, plant veg, I can't do gardening because I end up getting distracted by, you know, pottery and clay pipes and bricks and things. But they were explaining to me how these processes would work, and that's what the great thing about community archaeology is, that it is a team effort. It's not just the archaeologist telling you what you have to do and what you have to believe, if you like, and what you have to, you know, interpret in a certain way. It's a bit of
Oh, we lost your last part, Laura.
Oh, did you?
A little bit with the Wi-Fi, yeah.
Oh, right, sorry. Yeah, it's just that it's more like a group effort. So you're not just telling them what they have to believe and what they assume is there and your interpretation. It's a group interpretation.
Definitely, I think it's what I love, and so many of us I think enjoyed about that experience, is connecting with each other.
Also with that, what's really important, you say this sort of top-down archaeologist telling people this is what you've got in your garden. Also, that local knowledge can be really important as well, especially people that have lived, you know, maybe in a street for 10 years or 40 years. You know, be like, oh, what's this? You'd be like, oh, that was, you know, the old outhouse, or that's where, you know, the old toilet was, or something. And so that collaborative approach can only be, you know, beneficial for each other, archaeologists learning, and the householders learning, but also the archaeology as well. You might be looking at something thinking, oh, what is this, a post hole? What is this? And, oh no, that's the old, you know, coal flue or something like that. So that community aspect, again, obviously keep going on about the community aspect, but that is a two-way street, isn't it? Learning from each other. And I think that really actually came out sort of with the programs so far, people, you know, remembering what was around in the past.
Definitely.
I've got to go, I'm afraid. I've got to go and cook some tea. But I just, completely unrelated, I just want to say one thing, that the boreholes made me kind of think that actually, Chris might want to say a couple of words as well. We've got the final report to come from the dig that we're working on. Trent and Peak are working on with Solstice Heritage. We've actually got some radiocarbon dates, so some scientific dates that are forthcoming, and also some other work on, you know, the pollen and the environmental remains that we found as well. So we might get some really interesting kind of further insights onto, you know, so there's the date of the channel when it silted up, you know, what the kind of the contemporary environment was like, and that's really important in relation to the test pit as well that got down onto the cobbles, because all the finds that Annie was talking about, the animal bone, etc., we might be able to get also a date of that deposit as well. So we go out from this sort of little point of the borehole and the test pit to actually, you know, reconstructing the landscape a bit. So that could actually potentially be some really, really interesting stuff. So I really like your idea, Tash, of having this kind of like resource link as well, you know, for Lenton as well. We've got loads of reports online as well. So if you had that, we could put some stuff up and link to it, you know, and, you know, access to, you know, stuff and communities can be digital as well and online, isn't it? So, you know, it would be really good to open up in that way.
Brilliant.
So sorry, I've got to go.
Thank you so much for joining us, Gareth. Thank you. See you.
Can I just be very, very silly with a brief interjection there, which is that I noticed as Gareth was speaking, the auto captions were coming up underneath, and Chris May came up as Charisma. So I think that's going to be my new name for Chris now.
That is a brand. No one's ever called me that or applied that to me, so that would be nice. Yeah, thanks.
Like Charisma Carpenter, she was one of the actors in Buffy. It's a genuine first name.
Thank you.
Which one was that though? Who's what role does she play?
Cordelia.
Is that Cordelia? Her name is Charisma. Oh, I love Cordelia. She's cool.
I have never seen
cool
Buffy ever.
I have totally derailed the live stream.
No, never seen it. No.
Amazing.
Well, Annie, if we get a second series, you have to watch Buffy. Otherwise, you're not
Okay.
allowed in the Dig
It's on-
HQ tent.
It's on
You're gonna
full
text
music at
me.
the moment.
I saw my first ever episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer in Lenton, just about 2 streets away from the dig. Yeah, that's just suddenly dropped into my head.
That is a beautifully professional save of the absolute wild tangent we just took. That was absolutely class. Well done, James.
Yeah, 2 streets away it would have been. Yeah, that's where I saw it. I don't think I've mentioned it in the context of this this chat before, but like Chloe, I went to Nottingham University as well. I was there in the second half of the 90s, and in around 99 2000, the boat became my local, and that's where the Dig HQ was in the garden, the beer garden of the boat. And it was really odd being back in there. The pub's really changed internally. Since we used to drink in there, but there was just something really quite comforting about it. You know, there were so many new people to meet. There was also a lot of old faces as well. So I went to university at exactly the same time as Gareth, who's just left us as well. So there was this kind of a familiar unfamiliarity about working on the program. But I really enjoyed the vibe of just being sat in the boat beer garden again, ruminating on drunken shambles that had occurred there over 20 years hence.
I was just gonna. There's a few things that are going in my mind right now, but yeah, it was a great experience, and yeah, you know, just imagine if we'd filmed this, and it wasn't a pandemic. Like, just, you know, imagine, like, you're just like, yes, imagine. You would have had more tales to tell, James, wouldn't you?
Yeah, right.
Can we talk about the elephant in the room, which is Hugh's magical pint?
Yeah.
A few
Yeah.
people have pointed that out to me.
I was supposed to make a joke about that, and I forgot. Damn it! I knew I forgot something.
Quick, get him back. Never mind the vaccination.
My sister-in-law's a BBC journalist, and that was the first thing she texted us. Hugh's magical pint, and those were the words that she used as well.
Yeah, I got several text messages saying exactly the same thing, and then screenshots as well. People going, "See, look."
There is slightly off tangent, but there's a comment by Nigel, which is actually quite good, because in the next episode you will see this. He goes, one thing you could have done but did not show was a digital surveying to place the position of the trenches and their depths against an OS map, data or OS map. Well, tuning to episode 4, even though I haven't seen it, but I'm sure there'll be some there, because we were definitely talking about that quite a lot, as we do in every episode. But yeah,
I think I can probably, obviously there's one of the things that we've enjoyed being able to do as a practice, who do a lot of different archaeology projects, a lot of different archaeological techniques, has been showcasing some of the different, Tash talked about it earlier, but showcasing some of the different techniques that contribute all together to an archaeological project. So in this case, you know, having the ability to have James on site with us, to have Marcus on site with us, to do which we wouldn't normally have the benefit of, and then also to have to be doing some geoarchaeology. Obviously, in the last episode at Massam, we had Caroline and the ability to do visualizations of the faces of one of the skeletons that we excavated. That's been immensely rewarding for us to be able to not only take advantage of all of those different things on site, but also actually put them out there and allow other people to see that. And in terms of survey, it's something I get very excited about. But next week, people will. There is a whole sort of part of the program, a whole thread in the program about survey, and also I suppose as well as that, Chloe mentioned this before, but a different way of thinking about archaeology in terms of not just stuff that we're digging up that's underneath the ground, but actually using your eyes and not having even ever to pick up a spade, but by thinking about the landscape as it is, and applying the archaeological process to the landscape as it is without digging. And that comes into next week's episode. So if that is your particular interest, await next week.
Definitely. And you know, just going on from your last comment there, archaeology is not just intrusive, it is non-intrusive. So it'll be great for people to see that there are many aspects to what we do and how we do it. So yeah, next week. Excited. It's our last episode though.
Hopefully not the last forever.
No, yeah, last for the series.
It might be the last for me after I complained about people trying to make me say things I didn't want to say, but hey ho.
No, I mean, look, I mean, at the end of the day, like, there's a question that James answers very well, and I think it's in Sherwood Forest, right, when we're talking about Robin Hood. And you know, there's ways that we can communicate what we want. At the end of the day. And James, you did it, you nailed it on the head there, and you did it very well, masterfully well.
What did I do unconsciously?
I think you deflected it, didn't you? I think it was like Hugh asks you about Robin Hood. And yeah, you gave a great, and you know, the way that you answered was great, and it's understandable as well, you know, like how you explain why you come up with, you're trying to remember. I see
there's a bit of backstory there in that Jane, the director, and I scripted that up in advance. So you know, sorry to sort of break the fourth wall and everything there, but we'd had a whole meeting, an hour-long meeting about that particular scene about a week before filming, where we kind of worked out how we wanted it to play out. Now, Hugh wasn't part of that scripted element. He was kind of given some leading questions, but we'd already kind of worked out how to handle it. And I you're right, I didn't want to just sort of be drawn down an avenue of talking about Robin Hood needlessly, really, because I think there is value in Nottinghamshire in talking about Robin Hood, because we can't get away from it. Ultimately, that is what Nottingham and Nottinghamshire, and especially Sherwood Forest, is known for worldwide. And we do have to embrace that in a way that some of our local authorities hadn't done previously. Robin Hood was almost an embarrassment, but more recently it has been drawn through into research. There's been 2 really good books looking at kind of the development of the Robin Hood myth in the last year alone. So there's been some really good research, and it is something that we can look at archaeologically, because we can look at the period of the time when those stories were created, because they are medieval stories. But yeah, it's difficult to avoid having it shoehorned in, and so Jane and I tried to work that up and make it as organic as we possibly could, so it maybe wasn't as off the cuff as possibly appeared on screen. And I hope that's to our credit from having thought about it quite carefully for a long period of time beforehand. Anyway, Robin Hood, a problematic character in Nottinghamshire, but also potentially a very useful one as well, because we do need to give people the kind of the hook to get them interested in the archaeology of the period and of the region as well. And if we can use Robin in that way, then all power to his elbow, I say.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I enjoyed that scene. I need to watch it again, but I didn't know it was scripted, so news to me. I think it was brilliant what you said.
It was the only bit of filming that I did which was in any way scripted, and we just wanted to make sure that we got it right,
yeah,
I think, rather than just riffing on it.
One of the things he said, James, when Hugh's Robin Hood, he said, well, he's probably lots of different people. He's no one individual. And I think that was actually a really important thing to say, because everybody, you know, so many films and TV programs and, you know, Men in Tights and things that people imagine Robin Hood was this, you know, one mythical man. And a few years ago now, I recorded a seal matrix, medieval seal matrix, of a guy called Fulk Fitzwarren III. And you probably have heard of him. There were stories written about him. He was a sort of Robin Hood type character, and some people have suggested that maybe Robin Hood, the myth, is based on him. But when you look into sort of his life, it doesn't, as you say, it's an amalgamation of different things that were happening in different places, and this mythical being of Robin Hood just kind of sprung out of the time, didn't it? So I thought that was a really important thing to say on the programme, that he's not just one individual that, you know, we can easily identify.
Laura, does he come up much in your sort of community archaeology focus? Is it a common theme for you, Robin Hood?
Actually, not really, not massively. Yeah, some people, I think the main thing is the dinosaur thing, to be honest. So have you found any dinosaurs yet? I'm like, no, that's Ross from Friends, that's not me. But no, Robin Hood's one of those, yeah, interesting characters, but no, not usually. It's passed me by a little bit, but mainly because I think quite a lot of the stuff we end up working on are not necessarily near to where you'd associate with Robin Hood, but also it might not be the right date as well. I think the only time we've ever had Robin Hood mentioned was when, during going back to Lenton, digging on the marketplace, we found a whole skeleton of a cow, and one of the contractors on site said, "Is that Robin Hood's horse?" I think that's the only, and he was a contractor, and that was commercial archaeology. So yeah, I think it probably gets mentioned more by contractors on commercial sites than it does with the general public. So yeah, take from that what you will.
Actually, Laura, for you, because you've worked a lot in the UK, in Lenton, you've done a lot of community-based. I can hear myself. Anyway, sorry. You've done a lot of community-based projects in Lenton. So how was that for you to do it again, but with a TV crew and all of us just turning up? How was that experience for you?
It was faster, I think. The fact that it literally was 4 days, and then we had to record and backfill on the last day when it was absolutely heaving it down with rain. Yeah, I think it was a lot faster. I'm quite used to being able to stop and explain to people what we're doing and why we're doing it. We're not just digging a hole for the sake of digging a hole. There are questions to be answered, and there are certain processes you have to go through to do it properly, so that you're then recording it properly, and everything that you then take out is stored properly, recorded properly, understood, because archaeology is a process of destruction. We are destroying the thing we are trying to record. So if you're not doing that properly, then there's no point in even doing the hole in the first place, digging the trench or a bigger excavation. So yeah, having to unfortunately squash all that important process into one day was interesting. But that's the bit I do like doing the most with the community, because on things like TV, you don't see that with Time Team or all these other ones that we've had in the past, and with this one as well, you don't necessarily see that side. So actually showing somebody how to do a plan recording, you're planning your features, your archaeology, you're drawing sections of all of the layers that we've dug through, as well as having to write pages and pages of information on each thing that we dig. That's the bit that I enjoy doing with the community, and that's, I think, the bit I missed doing with this one a little bit. So yeah, the dig we did before, we managed to actually slow it down and have a lot more time with people so they understood the process completely. Whereas obviously on here, it was more of just, let's get you doing the stuff that people associate with archaeologists, which is digging with either the big yellow digger or the small trowel. So yeah, that's the difference, I think, for me.
And I think also we had different restrictions this time, because of course we had COVID-19 restrictions and protocols to follow. So I think if it had been filmed in a different situation, then maybe there would have been more of that connection as well with people.
Absolutely, Tash, because when we made the pilot, that was very much the case. And unfortunately, when you've got to be 2 meters distant to somebody at all times, you can't really spend as much time with them and show them as many things as you would otherwise, especially things like planning, which you kind of have to be a bit closer for. So I definitely think that was a factor in it. It would be good if Laura can if we can get more series and Laura can come and do more stuff and everyone can come and do more stuff with us, Annie and James.
Things were slightly different for me in that I'm not used to looking down holes. No,
you had a trowel in your hand, James.
All right. my social media lit up during that bit of the programme. One of your former colleagues would not stop having a go at how come I had a trowel and was it very rusty and when was the last time it had seen the light of day? No, the last time my trowel had seen any action was 2017 at Billson House. I'm not a digging archaeologist. I'm quite proud to admit that. I'm slightly fazed by the fact that, you know, I was there to look down holes rather than look at a building which was above the ground. So, you know, I think both Laura and I have very different experiences as to how we would normally operate in many regards, really. You know, there wasn't much in the way of standing building. Actually, although to say that, in terms of standing building archaeology at Lenton, and again, this wasn't touched on in the programme at all, but aside from the pillar where you had your initial meeting where you stood and talked about the pier being as part of the ambulatory, but of course there is the chapel of St Nicholas, which may have been the monastic infirmary, which was, you know, we were all walking past it constantly, but it was another one of those elephant in the rooms. It's a very early building, which, you know, is probably late 12th, early 13th century, something like that, and it was possibly the monastic hospital. And then also in the local parish church is the font, which is incredible. It's a huge font, and it's probably one where you could actually immerse a person within it. So there's a couple of, you know, quite important bits of archaeology which I think weren't touched upon because they weren't related to the excavations in the holes, if you know what I mean. There was very much of a focus on what was coming out of the trenches rather than the archaeology that might actually be stood above the ground. So I'm not holding that against anybody, but it would be good in future series to see some buildings drawn into it as well.
I can see from the comments that David Connolly hasn't watched the whole live stream because he's just suggested a complimentary website with more info and details. And I just wanted to respond to that because we've been talking about that earlier, haven't we, Tash?
Great minds think alike.
But then he came in to say James with a trowel outrageous.
Who said that?
David Connolly.
David.
Badger. David.
Thank you, Uncle Badger.
But yeah, David, you're right. You know, we if we do get a second series, I think we could try to suggest something. I'd love to be a part of that because that's like another part of community engagement and actually just like another place to store information. I think it's a great tool to have, and something that's free and accessible for everybody is really what I always try to push in general. Not everyone can afford to buy a monograph or something like that. I'm not saying there's going to be a monograph on this, but I mean in general. So I think if we have like online database for anybody and anyone, you know, to look at any time, I think that'd be brilliant. But yeah, Marcus, you haven't spoken for a while.
No, I've just been waiting.
Well, we've been going for 1 hour and 40 minutes now, so I know it's been going for a while. So Marcus, just a couple of things really in regards to, you know, what you do. You create digital images, and the process of that. I don't think we got to see all of that, if I remember correctly. I think we could see you with a camera a few times, like with the DSLR taking photos, but that's about it. So how long does it take to create these models, or even just that jug model, the one that we see in this episode? How long does that take?
Well, so we've got to so for the jug we've got to 3D record our shirt. So that's the thing to do. So that's the photogrammetry of one side, then we flip it over to the photogrammetry the other side, and then we synthesize the images to create 2 3D models, one of the top, one of the bottom, or left or right, and then we join them together. And then we've got that, and it's to scale. And then in that case, it's down to Annie then to identify the type of vessel that it might have been from. and pull up examples. So again, we're looking at previous research. So we know that this particular type of pot, it's been recorded before, it's been found in a more complete sense, and so it's been published. So we're referring to that, and we'll find one that's like pretty much the same, of ideal candidate for our pot, and then we'll take that profile and we'll extend that profile in the computer, and then we'll do a kind of a lathe on it. And then we'll fit our sherd into that to see where our sherd might fit. And then when it comes to handles and spouts and things like that, I have to physically model those by hand in sort of a digital clay type thing. And that's how we get from sherd to reconstructed pot.
It was really good actually watching you do that, Mark, because it's not something that I've ever seen, because been a specialist in metalwork and pot. That's done by somebody in a different room somewhere, in the office. And actually watching you do it was absolutely brilliant. It's not something that I'm familiar with at all. But I just want to say there is a little bit of artistic license with our jug. It was a very small shard. If we'd have had maybe a rim shard or a base shard or even a handle, but we know that jugs were very common in the medieval period, and we were sort of trying to illustrate the story as well. So there is a bit of artistic license, or creative license, I suppose. But it was, it really brought it to life, I think, just a tiny little shard. And then it didn't make it on the show, did it? But you did another reconstruction of this little shellyware, which is probably sort of 11th or 12th century, another little bowl. And again, as Marcus said, the vessels that Marcus reconstructed are based on other excavated examples, very, very well documented, examples from all over the country. So we didn't just sort of, make it up. There is a basis, a very strong archaeological basis for the reconstructions that Marcus did. It was just great watching you, Marcus, and how quickly you did it. I'd still be trying to work out how to open the program, and you'd already, created this amazing jug. It was brilliant. I really enjoyed that.
It's not normally done under such time pressure, to be honest. It's especially, and I'm also juggling with James. We've got this giant priory that we've got to show in a day or two. We're just trying to. So yeah, it's quite challenging, actually. It's quite stressful sometimes. Just because that they want to do the scene, and they're coming back, and they're giving you the pot and saying, okay, make this, make that, and they're going to come back in 3 hours, and you've got to have it all done and dusted. And then you do all that, and then I made, I don't know, three pots, I think, for Benwell. Not one of them made it on. Not one of them made it into the cup. Really nice ones, an indented beaker, the mortarium. It's really nice stuff.
This can all go on the website when we have the website.
On the website.
Natash's website.
We need to get some money. HLS, give me some money and I'll do it.
On Benwell, I've got, I came prepared. We've got like a full Roman cavalry model guy and a horse and all the horse bits and pieces, and in case you found any metalwork that was related to it. So, but that didn't get used either because we didn't have the finds. But
we did we did a piece of very small column shaft as well, didn't we?
Yes.
Which was one of the few bits of building material that was found in the excavation.
Yeah.
I think we filmed something of that, and then you made the reconstruction of it, and then stuck that into the Priory Church.
I think we made it a blind arcade in the end. Because we thought it was had been used indoors because of the lack of erosion on it. And it was just half, wasn't it? It was just a small half.
Yeah, that little piece came back actually, and I had it in the office here for a few weeks because I did the post excavation assessment on the stonework from it. So yeah, there was a nice little present that arrived one day from Trenton Peak with this little column shaft again that we buggered about with at great length detail that never made it into the show.
I know, I was gutted about that because there was so much excitement in the finds tent, and I was like, oh, James, is this what I think it is? Like, and for it not to make it on, and I was gutted.
Oh well.
It definitely goes back to what Hugh said earlier, doesn't it? About, you know, what excites us might be quite surprising to him.
Yeah.
It was objectively a beautiful piece, though.
Yeah, it was, and I would say that it was classic medieval.
Thank you, thank you. I don't think we've mentioned it for at least 20 minutes.
We're all going to get T-shirts, Chloe, with the gift.
It was classic, yeah.
Quick question about that fragment. Was that the bit that Pat and Glynis found?
Yeah, it was in the spoil, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it's in the spoil.
Yeah, as all the really good finds on any excavation are always in the spoil, aren't they?
Yeah, always in the unstrap, definitely. Yeah. And before we wrap it up, actually, it'd be just nice to mention that we did have members like Pat and Glynis who were on the show off screen. They're actually the couple that you find that Chloe goes to with that part, that little bit of the bed.
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, so those two individuals are amazing. Laura, actually, if you have anything to add about their contribution to Trenton, well, into that area of excavations.
Well, Pat and Glenys, for a start, they're fabulous. Let's just mention them because I've known them for about 8 years now. And they just are always around on site, always interested, always taking photos. They were about in the 80s. I think they did a small dig in the 80s as well in that area. So yeah, we should mention them really, because they did quite a lot of good work, and they were on the sieves. Obviously, bless them, they were the ones that said we can't really get in the dig anymore. But yes, they were on the sieves. So yeah, no, it was a great little dig, and it was great to get everybody involved. And yeah, hopefully we'll get a chance to go back again. But there's still lots of things that we haven't touched upon, lots of stories and elements to Lenton Priory that we still need to investigate. So, and it was nice that they did get a chance to find the most interesting bits off the spoil heap, in some people's opinions, James.
Should say as well, Laura mentioned before about the value of what people in the community bring to this kind of work, but they actually were amazingly helpful and had dug on the site previously in terms of helping us to understand some of the archaeology that we found in the large trench with the buttress in it, which you see on the programme. They had actually excavated a little corner of that trench, that piece of ground previously. They had photos of that. You don't see a lot of this on screen, but you do see a little bit of it in the background, I think, when maybe you're talking, Tash, or something, and there's a bit of a conference going on in the background with stroking of beards and general sort of puzzlement. And actually, yeah, and part of it was about using photographs that they'd taken actually to understand what it was that what we had in part of the trench. So that was incredibly useful. And then another trench which didn't make it into the programme that we mentioned before in Priory Park, Glynis had played, I think, with her cousin on the surface, on the brick surface that we'd found of the back lane of the houses there. So archaeology isn't just stuff that unconnected to people now when we dig it up. She remembered that as a street you could walk along. So that was amazing, and again incredibly helpful in helping us just go, oh, it's that then, brilliant, write it up and move on, fabulous. So they gave us the answers that we would not have got to in the same way at all. So they brought a huge amount of useful information, which we made the benefit of, and was given to us as fabulous help.
Definitely. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you all this evening. Is there anything to add regarding the show before we go offline?
Sorry, I'll just say again, it's talking about some of the stuff that wasn't shown, but the experience of making the show for me was fabulous, and it's just a shame that we weren't able to show a lot more. But things such as one of the researchers, I think, from the TV crew having to climb over the students' gate to let us in the morning because they were still in bed.
That's
Yeah,
right.
to give him a boot up.
That really should have
I
made
had
it.
to help him get up. It was that Fergus. I think it was Fergus, wasn't it? I had to help him vault the wall.
Yeah. I really wish that had made it into the show.
Yeah.
Thank you, students. That was worth it.
Yeah.
Laura mentioned about how much she likes post-ex. Recording rather. Fish and Laura with arms out of the trench at the end to backfill it. Wish that had been in there because we needed like a lever to get her out of that trench.
I wouldn't stop digging, would I? We just kept saying, no, we need to stop now. It's like, no, a few more cobbles. Just a few more cobbles.
Yeah, that would have been a wonderful illustration of how much archaeologists love their work. So, things like that. So I'd, as you can tell, lots of stories from the process. A great time making that episode.
I would just like to big up to the runners who kept supplying me with chocolate that basically allowed me to fly. That's how much chocolate I had. Constant sugar rush, but it was great. It was all a bit surreal.
I do wish that we could have that at site. Like someone runs and like, do you want tea, coffee? Have some snacks, have some water. And I was just like, wow, if only like this was like every job I went to, like in general. It was just amazing to have that, And again, by the way, Morgan from the student's house said, whoops, sorry about that, about the gate. But definitely, it was an absolute experience meeting everybody on that site and meeting you all and working with you all. If there are any questions, by the way, from the audience who watched this at another time, you can leave them in the comments section. When you hit that like and subscribe button, you can leave a comment and we can get back to you at another time, or over on Twitter. Most of us are on Twitter as well. So if you do have any questions about the show, please feel free to drop them in the box down below, or Twitter or Facebook or somewhere. I'm sure we'll find the questions. But that's it. It's been an absolute pleasure, guys. Thank you for everyone who's tuned in. And Wednesday is episode 4, where we venture. I don't know, actually, do we actually say where we go? We don't, do we? Where we go somewhere else? I don't know if it's mentioned in the show.
I think we can stay, can't we? We're going to South Shields.
Yeah, we go to South Shields.
I think we can stay.
Yeah, okay. And you'll find out now why in the trailer I'm like, it's Russian. That makes the clip. My husband saw that and he was like, of all things to make like a TV show is you being like, oh, it's Russian. By the way, my husband.
That did make me laugh.
Yeah. I was like, people are gonna be like, yeah. So for anyone who doesn't know, my husband is Ukrainian, so he speaks Russian. That's why there's that bit in there. But again, thank you all for tuning in. To our viewers at home, we'll see you next Saturday at 5 o'clock, where we have another chat about episode 4. We break it down with the archaeologists on and off screen. Thank you all, and good night. Now we need to find the page. There we go. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Tash. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.
You guys can stay on. It's fine. I'm just turning it off.